City podcast, where we have candid conversations on today's topics to help connect our community. I'm here with the one and only Jeswin Thomas. What's up, man? How's it going?
I'm not the one and only. There was another Jeswin Thomas at your wedding. So you
Yes.
invited another one, and you made sure that I knew that I was not the one and only one.
So funny. I was just hanging out with him, and he asked me, he's like, how is Jeswin doing? And his wife's name is Stephanie. How crazy is that?
Bonkers.
So
Crazy.
So you are not unique at all.
Thank you.
That's great to know that you are just a carbon copy of someone else. But how is Jeswin in Chicago doing? How is your life?
It's good. I feel like I haven't just talked to you in a minute. We just wrapped up our connector series, and so now that we're just sitting here looking at one another, it's different.
Yeah, it's strange.
There's no third person in the room.
I know, right? It's been really great. I think this connector series has been really fun. If you haven't heard any of those episodes, what are you doing? First of all. Second of all, go back and listen to all the great interviews that we just did. So we're wrapping up this connector series because our society is so crazy and disconnected. But there are some amazing people within our community that do a great job of connecting others in so many different ways, whether it's businesses, content creation, just exploring church history. There's so many great things that people are doing. But one thing that I think we've noticed is that each of them exhibit an attribute of being a connector. They actually foster community in a world and in a time where we're so disconnected. So, Jeswin, I'm so glad that we get to connect and talk about this. It's really interesting because as we've done those series, the one thing that I've just come to this conclusion of is that the world itself is better at fostering community than the church. Do you agree with that sentiment?
That's a hot take. The world is better at fostering community than the church. I don't know if I agree with that. I'm kind of a 50-50 up in the air. I can definitely see where your head might be at, but let's see. Let's see as we kind of go through this and we talk about it. Let's see if we agree with the statement or not.
I don't know why. I think it's just because the more I talked to those folks, and you and I have interviewed folks, and then I go back to church and we talked about this beautiful, rosy picture of community. And then you go to church sometimes, and not that, I go to a great, healthy church. I know you do as well. And like when I look at the landscape of America, all these people talk about churches as family and all this, but a lot of times what I notice is just people going in and out. And maybe it's the phase of life that I'm in, especially with kids and families. And I always have this phrase that I talk to my friends about. It's just like, oh, we're in this phase of life. It's really hard, especially in your 30s and 40s, where it's like, all right, I think our circle of friends grows smaller, right? And it gets really hard to foster deep connections. But it just seems like that's the landscape of America that I notice. It's not like when I was in my 20s and when we were just, everybody's at a prayer group when you could just drop everything and like tell everybody your problems. It just seems like it's an in and out society, and work has like all of these ways to create these little groups and is very intentional about like finding your identity. I don't know if you agree with that or have seen that societally about churches in America.
Churches, well, I think, there's definitely an argument to be had that, us as a society, it's almost like church is like an add-on, right? Like is the one thing that we kind of in and out, check the box sometimes. Sometimes even church-going Christians, there's surveys that have been out there that said, yeah, are you a regular church-going Christian? And people that perceive themselves to be might only go once a month and still think that they're a very regular attender and think that's sufficient. That's my quota, and that makes me regular, if you will. At the same time, I think churches have been trying to foster communities. We're part of small groups for the past 10, 20 years, and we've loved it, and it's really been life-giving for us just being involved. You got to take a step toward the church, and I think the church does in many ways do its part in really helping you feel like you're part of the family there.
Yeah. And I think taking a step back and looking at the broader lens and the landscape of, I think, even America, I keep hearing this where like loneliness is an epidemic, especially for guys. And I think it's not just churches that are kind of this in and out and this problem of disconnection, but it is, this epidemic, as they say. And I know Harvard did this study, and there's this great paper that I think we should link out. It's Loneliness in America, just the tip of the iceberg. And they cite a bunch of these stats. I think we've talked about a book that I know you're reading and I read, The Anxious Generation, where it talks about technology and phones and all these kind of things that cause these disconnection points. But some of these things, I just want to read out some of these stats where it's like, why is loneliness a problem in America? And the first bullet point is technology. 73% of those surveyed selected technology as contributing to loneliness in the country. Second one is insufficient time with family. Some other reasons are people are overworked or too busy or tired. That's 62% of people. Mental health. And I found one really interesting one where it says no religious or spiritual life, among other things, where 50% of people who participated in the survey selected that as one of those answers. So it's really interesting that all of these reasons, not just for religious folks or Christian folks, that loneliness is a big problem and society is disconnected today. And I think that causes this problem and why I think we really needed to highlight this series. I don't know if you have thoughts on that in terms of like the actual problem. Like, is that true or is this just all make believe?
Yeah, I mean, just like you said, Job, and like both of us have been going through Actions Generation, and I think I am convinced it is a byproduct of our technology. Like our
Yeah.
phones, we are so connected, but we're so disconnected at the same time. You think about the fabric of America, even when we were growing up, right? Like you knew your neighbors, you're hanging out with your friends. You had no way to contact them. Maybe you had a walkie-talkie in each other's houses, which I had with one of my neighbors two houses down. Was like, yo, let's go to the park, right? Like, yeah, your parents are there. It's cool if you're hanging out for 6 hours. Everyone's kind of okay because there's an aspect of even your neighborhood being a mini community, watching
Yeah.
over the children that are kind of going around. You know, church being a fabric, a meeting point in society. That was a very regular part of the culture. But as these meeting points start moving, as you're just connected on your phone, but you don't even know who's living next door, as these things are detracted, you're really left with nothing in terms of a community that you can call your own. So I see how loneliness has been spiking, especially after the advent of just a smartphone in general.
Yeah. You know, it's funny that like I know we were together in Nashville just a couple weeks ago, at the time of this recording. But we got to see each other hang out. But then we had like 15 other guys who were there for a bachelor party. And like I haven't seen a lot of those guys in a long time. And we all kind of like picked up like it was nothing, right? Like it was just business
Yeah.
as usual. And we all had a great time. And even though it was a short time. And I think that's so interesting because even if we were disconnected for such a long time, the relationship that we fostered after all those years still kind of picked up like it was yesterday, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's so interesting because it's ingrained in us, and that we were able to just find the commonality and have fun and joke around. And I think a lot of these connectors that we interviewed exhibited some really interesting attributes too, because there's something that they do that really helps, teach us as society and our culture to like, hey, you don't have to settle for disconnection. You can actually
Mhm.
foster community. So I know we jotted some of these down, but just like I would highly encourage, if you haven't listened to any of these episodes, please check out all of our great guests. And just looking at some of the attributes that they exhibited, one, fostering vulnerability, which is so important, being curious about the differences in others, embracing your cultural identity, being intentional with your relationships, and initiating physical presence. I think those are some of the themes that we saw in our connectors. Um, Jessamine, I mean, like just thinking about those attributes, I don't know if our churches do that really well today. And but these connectors do in all the different spaces. Like, what's your thoughts on like these attributes and why we're missing it in church
Yeah.
today?
Yeah, and maybe we go back to the premise that we started off with. Is the world better at doing these things
Yeah,
than the church? And maybe I mean I might word it a little bit differently. I think the world is trying to be more intentional about doing some of these things than the church is. I always remember, one of my first jobs. I was, still an actuary in the city, just a young one starting off, and I went into my chief actuary's room for this presentation once, and I remember on her desk is a book called Servant Leadership, a very
mm,
secular book on the
yeah,
concept of being a leader that's a servant. And I'm like, man, look at corporate America jacking
yep,
what is coming straight from the Bible. And I think that's just one example of really them looking at these principles and saying, hey, we need to do these things because these things are effective. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking through some of our corporate experiences. I'm sure you've had it too when we think about embracing identity. And I think of our business resource groups, right? Like, hey, I am part of this class or this gender or this, minority group. Let's come together and let's embrace it, even within our company. How do we, for example, make curiosity, make that part of being curious about the differences, right? Let's put on events that actually teach the broader company about who we are, what makes us who we are, and those kind of things. Even intentional relationships. I think about some great organizations too, right? Toastmasters is one that I'm sure many of us in corporate America might have heard of before. It's just a public speaking group that is all around the United States and all over the world, where you can come together and practice public speaking within your company, and you can start a Toastmasters group there. But again, just intentionally trying to foster relationships over something that everyone is pursuing. So these things are happening very intentionally at a company in a way that I wonder if the church is pursuing that level of intentionality in our
Yeah.
spaces. I don't know if you have thoughts or reactions to
No,
that.
I feel like we all just need to change our backgrounds for like AAPI month and like all those kind of things. I feel like, how like we do that. We celebrate
Yeah.
these things and we celebrate our identity. But it's so interesting. It's like the church or corporate America, I should say, is speaking into your gifts. They're like enabling those gifts of preaching by, hey, sign up to Toastmasters. Like we don't do that really well, right? Like when was the last time you went to church? And being part of healthy churches, is I think we see some of these examples, but maybe the mass majority of churches, are they actually speaking life into the gifts? Or maybe they don't even know you well enough to identify if there are gifts to empower you or platform you or give you an opportunity, right? Like, I don't think that happens well enough because they don't know you well enough and there's no space for them to know you well enough. I
Hmm.
think mega churches too probably have a harder time with that because there's no way you're gonna know the pastor personally. I think that's pretty rare, but at the same time, it's like we don't have these spaces where they can exhibit these attributes of these connectors that we've been talking to, right?
Well, even if they do know you well enough, I think we've known people even in the churches that we've grown up in, Jobbin, where we've seen them for the last 20 years. I could sometimes think about these uncles and aunties that have been in the pews listening Friday, Saturday, Sunday prayer meetings and Sunday services, and in hindsight, we both can sit down here and needle and think about like what was their spiritual gift, right? Like they were
Ooh, yeah.
faithful, but do I actually know them? And I've been in the pews with them for so long. I wonder if the problem is our the way that we've sort of structured our services, especially as Protestant environments, right? I think Francis Chan once said, one of the tragedies of our gatherings nowadays is we've reduced it down to a man and a band, a preacher and the music, right? And these are the gifts that we love fostering, right? Like, Mornay, you can speak, you should say something. Or,
Yeah.
oh yeah, you can play guitar. We need someone to lead worship. We are good at identifying gifts that fit the mold of the structure that we have. But
Mm.
what if we're pursuing the wrong structure, right? Like, right now I think of that potentially as more of a fundamental problem. Why are we not fostering other things outside of that? Is it maybe that we have a wrong conception of what the church should look like? I don't know if you have a reaction to that statement.
Man, you know what? I don't know if this is controversial, but I think like, it's because the churches are selfish, right? Like, I'm trying to build this platform. And a lot of times I understand there's exceptions. I get it. But like there's probably churches that are more focused on growing in audience in numbers. And if you and your gift that I see in you doesn't contribute to our growth internally as a church, why should I invest the time? It's almost like the ROI of people, right? Like, am I actually getting a return on investment and pouring into my resources into you as a member of this church? And if it's not going to result in our church growing in numbers, because like, wow, you're an amazing singer. What if we did a worship album, right? Let's make her and like use your talents to grow the awareness and branding of the church. Like, I could see that happening, right? But what if there were different gifts in you, but it just didn't contribute to the actual growth of the church in numbers? Do I have more of an incentive to pour into you or disciple you? I
Hmm.
think I feel like that's probably, and I don't have any data to back this up, but I feel like there's probably an element of truth to that because we're all like selfish in nature and we just revert to our sinful nature and work for the things that it's not servant leadership. It's the exact opposite of it, right? Like, how can I be self-serving to my own purposes? That's the first thing I think of. Um,
Yeah. Maybe I can see where that argument could be made, but maybe, when I think about it too, we also have to, as a church, think about like what, if our goal is to spread the gospel as much as possible, I think some of these things are might be selfish in nature, or maybe it's just a cookie cutter mold that we know potentially
sure.
works. If we can grow our influence, then more eyes are on what we're saying and what we're speaking as a church, and maybe we could share the gospel more broadly. And maybe that's one method that we have seen, and it's just been replicated at nauseum across our entire country, maybe the world, in taking this sort of model. But other
Oh, so
models that we haven't,
are you
you know,
saying like the structure of the church? Like, I understand, like we gotta optimize so we can spread the gospel more
mhm.
effectively. But are you saying that we need to rethink the way that we're even organized to
Yeah.
spread the gospel?
I mean, I think about the early church, right? And even a little bit after Antioch. I think one of the ways that we saw maybe the second, third century churches really grow in its witness to the world was, especially back in the day when, families would have either babies that were disabled, might, sometimes there was a bias toward gender. And, there was the one infamous stories where I forgot if it was the Greeks or somewhere in the Roman Empire, they would just take the babies and just put them on like the side of a hill. And one of the things, just to die, right? It's like, oh, this is weak, this is unwanted, we don't want this. One of the ways that the church really increases witness was by saying, like, we're going to take these babies in, right? Like, there's
Right.
inherent human value through this ministry. It wasn't through preaching, it wasn't through music, it was through a radical compassion in a way
Yeah.
that was never seen before. You think about the stories of like Mother Teresa. Everyone in society knows who Mother Teresa is, right? How many sermons have you heard by Mother Teresa? I know there's a lot of quotes.
Yeah.
It was all, just, and it's the quote that said, we may not all be able to do great things, but we can all do small things with great love. And that is the one principle she lived by. It is really thinking through, how does that exist, or how do those principles exist within our churches? We're after one model, but we aren't fostering these other things and really bringing it out, which I think might be what our generation needs to really be that witness to the world.
Yeah. And I think that's where my brain goes to, like, why don't we do that? Because it's such a clear picture of what the gospel is, but then our churches don't do that to be radically hospitable to others, right? Like radically generous to other people. Like, why don't we do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's because it is just so out of our norm, right? Just so out of our experience that there is some risk here. And I'm glad that there are people like you just highlighted in our connector series. Some of them are doing very pioneering type things, right? Like things that we haven't really seen before and trying it in new ways, and there has been fruit. And that's part of the reason why we wanted to highlight them, to say, hey, if this is possible with just an idea, with a small group of people just trying something different, and you're seeing fruit here, maybe you can be that same type of fruit in the location that God has planted you in bringing that sort of change and changing the paradigm of what's possible within the problems of your community.
Yeah, and I think that's where the creativity comes in, right? Like all the people that we talk to are doing something really unique, whether even like the avenue of the world that we live in allows you to start a business really quickly or just be creative in social media or, host a basketball gathering where you could just, connect with people through hoops, right? Like they're being really creative in connecting people, and it seems like it's outside of the structure of the church, to your point, right? Like there's ways that we can still foster community outside of the typical Sunday service and exhibit like true community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's one of the reasons I can't understand why it's not happening consistently in the church, but there's probably these influences that prevent churches from doing it, right? Like true community is not happening at every church, but at the same time, it is happening in some places because they probably understand fundamentally how we should live, like how God designed us, right? Um, but are there some? So we talked about structure. I think even just from a corporate structure, maybe even like the way that we're fit as churches doesn't allow for that individual attention. Like I think about a big church, it's really hard to focus on individual folks in the church unless you have like a small group or discipleship program, right? To meet
Hmm.
people. But corporate America does that really well, right? There's like this individual intentionality. You got your managers and you got these hierarchies, you got mentors at work that
Hmm.
do this. Um,
Yeah.
I think that's one of those reasons why it just doesn't happen in our churches, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
no, I completely agree with you. And again, from like you said, there's structure, there's hierarchy, but the focus is how do we get the most out of an individual contributor more than anything else? The focus is, if we're gonna put money behind you as an employee, we want to maximize your potential. I don't know if the church thinks about that in the same way. It's like if we have you in the pew, how do we maximize your potential? And I don't know. Maybe our focus isn't there. Maybe that's not the way that we're thinking about asking the question. Or is it? I don't know. What's your thought, Joby? Is that how you see churches typically operate and saying, I want to maximize the potential of the person in the pew?
Yeah, I think they probably are looking at it from like the tithe perspective, to be honest. Right? Like you look at it from like, hey, are you actually contributing? Are you growing your tithe? I've seen that before. Man, I've heard some crazy stories where like somebody wasn't somebody was complaining about their old Indian church and they were leaving. And they said, I'm leaving this church. And then they got an itemized bill to say, well, you said you were going to give for the rest of the year, so this is what you owe. And I'm
Oh
like,
my
are
gosh.
you
Are you
kidding me?
kidding me?
I'm like, they're really looking at that person in the pew as a dollar amount, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's a
Yeah.
really horrible negative example. That's rare. However, there's probably churches that think about the return on the investment and even in terms of like a gift about how you can contribute to the growth of my church. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, like strategically, but like, what would it be like if churches looked at individuals to say, hey, I want to foster your spiritual growth, whether it's here or not? Like one of the best leadership lessons I learned was from my old manager. And I was like, I put it out there. He was like, hey, where do you want to be in 5 years? Like, what role, what title, what do you want to do? And I was just like, I put it out there. But the thing is, the role that I wanted was not on his team. And
Hmm.
I was a high performer on his team. But what he told me really changed my outlook on leadership because he was like, hey, I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't help you maximize your potential, even if it's
Hmm.
not on my team. And
That's
that was
awesome.
such a like a sacrificial way to empower somebody. And like I'll never forget it. We became friends and like even outside of work and we just had this great relationship. And I'm like, man, what if every leader in a church said, I'm going to intentionally disciple you even if you're not going to be part of my church, right?
Yeah. I mean,
I,
that's
I
such an incredible story that you just shared. And what's crazy is that's not unique. That exact scenario happened in my first company when I was considering a second offer from a different company. I told my boss hits up our head of HR and they're like, "We are so sad, in some senses to potentially see you go. And you know what? We'll even tell you this. We can match your other offer if it was a monetary thing, but we're looking at this opportunity for you and we honestly think this is best for you and your growth. So as sad as we are to see you leave, we think you should take it because this maximizes your potential as an individual. And it's like, man, like the fact that that isn't unique, but how
yeah.
rare is that within the church? And I'm just trying to think, do we know examples of that, right? Like, do we see examples of that, often within our congregations? And like you said, maybe corporate America is intentional about doing that and where the
Yeah.
church is failing at it. I don't know.
Man, shout out to like Pastor Nate, who was like my mentor for a long time. I never went to his church. That's a crazy thing. I never went to his church. I was never part of his congregation. I just happened to meet him through a
Hmm.
friend, and we just kept in touch. I have to call him actually. We talked via text last
Yeah.
week, and I have to call him. But it's crazy. I think about that relationship and like pivotal moments of my life that he invested time into me, like from relationships to like even getting my first house. Like it was just one of those things where he navigated a relationship where if I had to put it on paper, the value that I gave to him, like I wasn't like, all right, now I'm going to be part of your church. Now I'm going to be, this leader at your church and help your church congregation. No, there's none of that. It was just he cared about me and he just
Yeah.
invested time. I worked at the University of Chicago. For those of you in Chicago, will know this. Like to get to the city, if you live in the suburbs, is really difficult. When I worked at the University of Chicago, he would come there and meet me for lunch
Wow.
And I was just like, you just come out there and like, you know, I'm not trying to put him on a pedestal, but it was just like one of these like relationships where I'm just like, wow, it really made an impact on me. And it was just like, we had no connection in church besides, you know, we did events and different things together after the relationship was established. So
Yeah.
I wish like churches could do that more without
Yeah.
any selfish intent, you know?
Well, I was gonna say, I think maybe if you're a listener just kind of hearing this conversation right now, you might think, you know what, Job and Justin, this is great and this is very theoretical sounding. But let's be practical, let's be realistic, right? Like, is this not just possible, but like where do you actually see this within scripture, right? Like you think about, I think about, for example, the apostles, right? The apostles when the first century church and after Acts 2, some of the Gentile believers like, hey, like our needs aren't being met right now, right? Like we got some widows, we got some orphans, we need people to like help out. And the apostles like, you know what? To be honest, we're just trying to consider God's word, and we just have a gift of preaching. So y'all hire some people and like take care of it. Yeah, they empowered some people to do and live out their giftings, right? Within the congregation and do that. But it kind of goes back to, well, they were just focused on like preaching the word and in some senses empowering other people to do other parts of ministry. And I think that's a healthy way to kind of look at it, right? There's leaders that see needs, then they empower people to meet those needs within the church. And right now, when we think about like a disconnection epidemic going on in society and even within our churches, how many leaders are empowering people not just to go and play the guitar and lead worship, not just to come to a youth meeting and say a psalm, not just to be a Sunday school teacher, but saying, here's some real needs. I see this in you.
Yeah.
I'm going to empower you. Go take care of it, because that's what you are called to do, and filling a gap that only you can.
Yeah. And like, and I think part of these attributes that we keep talking about are really great characteristics in us as believers that we can do that for other people, right? Like if I foster vulnerability in my own story, I could probably connect with people more deeply who might be struggling with something, right? There's
Mhm.
characteristics that we can see. um, it's almost like now that we were having this conversation, I feel like the church is such a bad business model, right? Like if you are truly living out the gospel and you're pouring into somebody without any expectation in return, and maybe it's the greatest business model, right? Because our reward is in heaven, but it's like you give and give and give without any expectation in return to ultimately see that person get closer to Christ, who is a reward that
Yeah.
we don't get anything out of. Like it's changing the way that we look at people without seeing what can I get out of them, or
Mhm.
really what can I give and impart into them, right?
Yeah. And definitely want to acknowledge there's definitely pockets of churches that are doing this well. And even
Yes.
Jobin and myself, we can all say we know plenty of leaders that are just like this. I mean, I have so many that come to my mind that just, hey, we just want to build you up and empower you. Go do what you're going to do here or elsewhere. That's going to be there. But I think one of the things that we just want to draw out and bring out in this conversation is, I think that's the intention. That's how it ought to be. And sometimes maybe there's a 50-50 split. I don't know what that split is,
Yep.
toward, hey, people that are doing this, people that are not. We can all speculate. We don't have the data for it. But I do want to bring up a couple verses here that was coming to mind as we are having this conversation. It's in Ephesians chapter 4. Sorry, not Ephesians chapter 4. Yeah, yes, Ephesians chapter 4. So it's in Ephesians chapter 4. And it was talking about the unity within the body of Christ. And one of the things that this chapter really gets into is talking about how people are given as gifts to the church. And these people being, I'll just read it from verse 11 and verse 12. It says, and he being God, and he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and the teachers. So there's these groups of people that are kind of given to the church. And really these titles are the people that are, on the stage, the ones that are leading, the ones that are speaking, the ones that are preaching the words, right? Like very intentionally, like prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers, the people that are very concentrated on the word of God. What is it for? Is it to make the next real? Is it to just proclaim the gospel, and their intention is, let's just get everyone in the building, and when I say the gospel, it'll be preached? What is it for? It gets into it in verse 12. It's to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ. The entire point of their office, the entire point of these leaders, is to equip me, is to equip you to do what you're intended to do, to build up the body of Christ. Now, what does that mean, to build up the body of Christ? Some of us are going to have to go out and, like these connectors, find ways to bring members of the body to be joined to the body. Some of us are going to think about how do we strengthen those that are already in the body of Christ. But the entire point is the pulpit, the person on the pulpit, the entire intent is to empower you to do your calling. That
Yeah.
is all their intention is to do. And using the word to do that, obviously. But it goes back to the corporate American model of saying, how do we maximize equipping you to live out your God given potential and your God given calling to grow this body so that the entire body is functioning as it should?
Yeah, I love the way that you put that because like that could be outside of the church and inside the church, and you're still building up the body, kind of like you build up your muscles, right? Like you have them attached to your body, but you got to build it up and strengthen it and edify the body, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I think about even just the businesses and people who create these creative ways to connect community that might be outside the four walls of the church, but you're still the body of Christ in the world where you can exhibit these attributes and truly behave like a true Christian, right? And to actually draw people in because they'll know we're Christians by our love and like the way that we act, right? I think that's such a great way to think about it. And like the more I think about it, like, wow, we can actually do this. And you don't have to be a preacher. You don't have to be a musician. You don't like I think back to Pastor Stevenson, like shout out to Pastor Stevenson. Like when I was a kid, he empowered me. I'll never forget it when he like read off the youth meeting list. And back in the day, I don't know if you remember this, but like we would have a list of those youth
Mm-hmm.
meeting programs, and the
Yeah.
pastors would be like, "Who's going to do the psalm reading? Who's going to do the song? Who's going to do the preaching?" But by the time he got to short story, because I said one before, he was like, he looked at me dead in the eye, like, Joby, I want you to do the next short story for next month because you did such a great job this time. Him saying that from the pulpit, like I was 7 years old, maybe. And I never forget it because it made me feel so
Mm.
confident and like, wow, I can actually speak in front of people. And the way that he like empowered me was amazing. And I never forgot that feeling. And somebody asked me at work the other day that because I facilitate a lot of meetings, they're like, wow, why do you speak to everybody so confidently like in a meeting? You're never nervous. I'm like, well, because I did it in church for years. Like, think about our churches, especially our smaller Indian churches.
Yeah.
Everybody's multi-talented in like music or speaking or Bible reference. Where that comes in handy, I don't know. But like, you know what I mean? We're all like talented in some of these things that we never would have been if we didn't have somebody speaking it into us or like empowering us,
Yeah.
right? I think we just need to
100%.
constantly do that more and more and more.
Yeah, and I think just on top of that, we just have to broaden our definition of what is the work of ministry, right? And
Yeah.
going beyond what's on the stage and going into what's impacting people. And that is a very broad definition that we can all, take away. And again, we just did an entire series on it, on the ways that people are applying what that work of ministry is in, variety of ways across America and across the globe.
Yeah. And I think just dismantling the myth that you can't connect community if you're not a preacher or a speaker or a musician and like
Mhm.
these like kind of templated things in the Christian world where there's ways that you can foster the attributes of a connector, foster vulnerability, be curious about the differences in others, embrace your cultural identity, be intentional about your relationships, and initiate that physical presence. Gather people together, even if it's just hosting people in your home, inviting people over for dinner, those kind of things. You could really foster community in places where there isn't any. And it
Yeah.
truly is a problem. Like it truly is a problem in society today. But we could be the reason, right? Where that doesn't have to be a problem if the church acted like the church,
Yeah.
right?
And I think this is also the time. As much as we almost give credit to corporate America in saying they're
Yeah.
doing these things intentionally better, and I do think there is an intentional focus on how they're doing that we should definitely take into consideration as believers in churches. But at the end of the day, we know that it's not satisfying because the counter stats of just seeing this generation and the stats of young men even flocking back toward Christianity and toward the church shows that as much as we try to initiate these things and foster these things, if it's just for the sake of doing it, it's not enough, right? The entire point is to go back to our created purpose, right? Going back to Genesis, going back to you were created to take a stroll in the evening in a garden with God. And because that is now void, we have this amazing missional opportunity to do that in this generation, maybe in a way that hasn't been done in previous generations. So it's an exciting opportunity and probably takes us to our takeaways, right? Like now that we're faced with this disconnection and seeing the ways that other people are connecting and looking at the missional opportunity, Joby, what do you feel like people could take away and almost implement from this conversation, even from the series?
Yeah, I think taking the initiative, like don't wait for somebody else to pull you into community. Be that person, take that initiative. And I think that's the interesting point of all the conversations that we just had in this series is there was some kind of burden, some kind of purpose that God strummed up in every one of their hearts to say, hey, I want to be curious about this, or I want to take a stab at this of starting a business or starting this movement or, even planting a church, whatever it is, right? Like be the initiator, have the courage, have the character and the confidence to say, well, God designed me like this. I think back when you talk about the garden in Genesis, like, let us make man in our image, right? Like a lot of these collective words in those verses in our fundamental design is relational. And if we don't think we are meant to do any of this, like we're not isolated from this. I think all of us have this fundamental design for community. And that's why I've been so passionate about it over the years. It's because like it's literally innate in all of us. And that's why you see these stats. But I think if I had to boil it down is just take the initiative to start something somewhere and you exhibit these attributes and I think you'll do 95% more than anybody else is doing around you, right?
Yeah, or I almost think of like, be a person that initiates that in others, right? I think of
Yeah,
like Adam's first job, maybe more abstractly, right? Like, what's he doing? Just naming
they
the
make the animals.
identity of creatures. Like, hey, you are giraffe. From now on, you will giraffe for the rest of your days,
Yes.
right? And sometimes we can look at a person and be like, dude, you are, right? Like the small group leader. You need to do this, right? Or you can be like, you are the person that is awesome at just gathering people together around like a picnic table. And that's all we need. Like that gift is infinitely valuable, right? You think about like people like Barnabas in like the Bible, where son of encouragement, right? Just an encourager, just to be like, hey, maybe that is your kingdom role, right? Like,
Mm,
just be the encourager that gives the people the fuel to live out their calling. And that, in and of itself, is a calling, almost like an Adam like calling that I'm thinking about. And who gave Adam his calling? God himself, right?
right,
It is a
right.
valuable calling to do exactly that, if
Wow.
anything else.
Yeah, and I think that's probably where society gets hung up in like the way people are platformed today because like, well, I'm not a great connector of people because I don't have a following list or an audience or a platform. It's like that's not the measuring stick. It's right. It's there's DNA in us that God's provided when He created us that is designed for community, and I think like don't look at the world's measuring stick to see if you're effective at something, but like you'll see it through the relationships. Just when I was talking to you about like, man, 20 years of like rock. I think July is like 20 years, and I just think back of all the relationships, right? Like there's different events we used to do. And I was just being really reflective this week. And man, there's people that I did not know when we started this thing. And to fast forward to 2025, I look back, I've stood up in people's weddings. We've been part of funerals, we've been part of kids' births or baptisms. It's like it's pretty mind blowing. Those are the rewards. And man, I have so many testimonies that I could share, but it's just like, wait, God, what were you doing when you said foster community? I used to think, oh, God, you would just restore the entire city of Chicago and there'd be no crime, no shootings, no nothing, right? Everybody would be in like one big building, right? Used to think that way, but it wasn't that. It was the relationships. It was actually weaving together these amazing relationships that we can pick up like nothing ever changed or like, you know what I mean? And it was really, I could see the common thread is God weaving our stories together and for the better, right? And I think that's such an amazing testimony of community
Yeah.
because it's not the numbers, it's not the volume of people, it's really the relationships that we build, right?
Well, even, we were talking about that trip to Nashville, right? And you think about these long relationships over decades, and you think about where people were when rock began, right? Or
Hmm.
I was probably like 7 years old. I don't know how old I was at that point, but you just even think about where rock began. And now you think about that group of people and look at where everyone is today, right? You think about that Nashville trip, right? You
Yep.
have people that are training for ministry, leading different things. It's almost like God gathered people together for a time. And now we're
Hmm.
all scattered, right? Like, shoot, you're scattered. You're not even in the original city that you intended to restore.
Right.
But at the same time, the work of ministry that we're all still doing to this
Yeah.
day
Yeah.
is, maybe creating another gathering for another scattering. And that's exactly how the God has always worked.
No joke. A couple days ago, I was just looking through our YouTube channel. So anybody's listening to this, if you're on YouTube and you can watch this, look for the oldest video on our channel. And it's this video of a couple of the guys that we started this ministry together. And I looked at it. None of those guys live in Chicago anymore. None of them. Joel's in Madison, Sibby's in Detroit, Jonathan's in Texas. I'm in Dallas. It's funny, and I think Danny was holding the camcorder, so shout out Danny. And he's in Texas too. Nobody is in Chicago. And we had this ministry focused on Chicago. And I was going through old pictures. I saw you at a project outreach that we did years ago. I was just thumbing through all the memories. And even like folks from Tennessee that we partnered together to did outreach together. Like it's so amazing that it was just, and even the testimony, one day we'll go through the testimony. It was just somebody from another state was praying and said, hey, I think I see a group of guys praying and starting a prayer group in Chicago. And evolved into whatever this turned out to be. But it's not because of this, right? Not because of the name. It's because of God. Like I just my mind is blown to like how God creates relationships for a reason, and it's ultimately to glorify him. And so like the next 20 years might not be through this avenue, but like how are you glorifying God in the people around you where he's placed you to be, right? Um,
Yeah.
I think it's such a powerful way to think about community and connection. And it's not the numbers. It's like, are you connecting people through relationships more than anything else? Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, this is a great conversation, and I hope everybody who listens to this one goes back and checks out the prior episodes. Let us know what you think, and if you have questions, and if you're like, "Hey, I have no idea where to start," you got two guys here who will be happy and thrilled to talk to you, and maybe we dive into some of those giftings that you are called into, and like what are opportunities you might be thinking of a dream that you have never hit the go button on, that you want to start and you just want to explore. Like, let us know. Please reach out to us. We're happy to talk to you. But Jeswin, I think this has been a really fun series. Looking forward to the next ones, but excited to keep connecting and doing this for the next 20 years. What is
All
that?
right. 20
2000,
years. Next
what,
next time in virtual
45?
reality, hopefully.
Yeah, all in VR. Avatars just talking to each other. Yeah. We don't even have to record it. It's just our avatars, AI, whatever it is. Who
Oh
knows?
man.
Who knows? Well, thank you guys for listening. We look forward to connecting with you guys on the next episode.